Hello, and welcome to the BigTime Strength Podcast, featuring small school strength coaches from around the nation that are making the big time where they are at. Before we get to the episode, we'd like to thank our sponsors that make this podcast possible. TeamBuildr is a strength and conditioning software that allows coaches to build training programs, create wellness questionnaires, access and track athlete data, and more. Athletes can log data using phones, tablets, or laptops and can watch exercise videos so they know exactly what to do. Coaches can use the tools within the platform to monitor athlete recovery and readiness. Be sure to sign up now with code BigTime and you will gain access to a 30-day free trial. This episode is also brought to you by Powerlift. Taking your athletic facility from concept to completion can be a challenge. It is Powerlift's goal to make the process as seamless as possible from start to finish. Their weight equipment is made from the toughest materials that can withstand excessive use from coaches and athletes for years to come. It's sought after for its unique design, customizable appearance, affordability, and superior warranty that training facilities deserve. Powerlift helps design weight rooms with the athlete in mind, and they pride themselves on their ability to outfit athletic facilities based on a team's unique goals. That's why high schools, universities, professional sports teams, and athletic performance facilities around the world have chosen Powerlift to help maximize their strength training goals. Call Powerlift today to be contacted with a rep in your area and give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to see for yourself why our clients are Powerlift proud. Finally, this episode is also brought to you by Vitruve. Vitruve is a velocity-based training system designed for colleges and high schools around the world. It is accurate, reliable, and affordable. The software is quick and easy to set up and use with a whole room of athletes simultaneously. Coaches have chosen Vitruve because it simplifies VBT and allows them to seamlessly integrate it on a daily basis. Check out Vitruve now for your school's free demo unit. Now, let's get to this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the BigTime Strength Podcast. Today we have an awesome guest from the state of Iowa again, Coach Matt Walter. What's up, man?
Hey, how you going?
I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for taking the time and for driving up here. So
yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
times when we do podcasts, I don't get the chance to have it like in person. So this will be fun.
Yeah, I'm definitely more. You said something about Zoom. I'm definitely more of an in person if I can help it. And I got enough Zoom during COVID and all that crap. So
yeah, totally.
Nice to be in person.
Yeah, I feel that. Like it's awesome to be able to talk with so many people around with Zoom stuff. But anytime you can get in the same room, it's just a little bit better. Right?
Absolutely.
So we're gonna go through our questions and get to why you're making the big times where you're at. But before that, sometimes it's just nice to know like the demographics that you're at. For the listeners that are listening, no matter where they're at, right? Like everybody's got their own little setup, and see if they can relate to your setup at all and what you got going on. So, what's the demographics of your school? What's it look like, and maybe the ins and outs of your job?
Yeah, so I'm at Solon High School. My first year there, or just completed my first year there, going into year 2 here coming up. Honestly, as far as student volume, I know we're a 3A high school. I'm probably working with around 400 kids a year. So, and I'm training all athletes, working with all teams. And typically, I'm on a non-teaching contract. So, I've just got a 12-month contract. I'm working basically from 6 in the morning till 3:30 every day. And I'm in charge of the groups before school and 3 of our 4 blocks that we do. We do block scheduling, so we're really lucky to have that in the sense that, we've got plenty of time each session for kids to come in and train. Our football coach, Lucas Stanton, does a great job and helps runs the third block, but my office is in there, so a lot of times I'm interacting with his class as well. So it's a pretty sweet setup. And Dave Williams, who's been doing an awesome job at Solon, has really helped build that program to what it is, and it's been really nice for me to transition into this role, working with him and being able to see what he's done in the past and help him implement that program as best as we possibly can has been made the transition that much better. He handles everything that's after school.
That's nice to be able to have the ability to be consistent. Would you say Monday through Friday, 6 to 3:30 or whatever, just the day in and day out of living the strength coach life. And I know Lucas too. We've had him on the show actually in the past, And he's a quality strength coach also. So you got a couple of guys that you can bounce ideas off between.
He knows his way around there. And
yeah.
we've got some similar training backgrounds, ideologies to how and why to train. So that's been really helpful. And then also been able to kind of get some feedback off one another of, you know, maybe one of us would have done things a little bit differently, or, you know, get on the same page terminology wise. And so it's been a really smooth transition, to be quite honest, and made the entry into that job, going from where I was at before for the previous 14 years, going to high school, really made that transition smooth, knowing I didn't have to start everything from scratch.
Yeah.
So that was huge. And it was an interesting transition to start, but I've really just loved it, and I love what I'm doing right now, and I've really enjoyed working with high school athletes.
That's what I was going to hop into next, actually, was what it looked like for the transition from college to high school. I know there are a number of high school strength coaches that were former collegiate strength coaches, and making that transition is always just a little bit different, right? It's a little bit different setting. Obviously, the age group's different, the demographics are different. How have you enjoyed that? What are some of the good things and some of the things that are just drawbacks too?
I would say before I went into it, number one, I didn't think I would ever do high school. I actually student taught at Solon with Coach Miller in 2009. Loved the kids I was working with there, but in the afternoons, I was leaving student teaching and going to It was my first year coaching there after graduating from there, and I was always looking forward to going to I had great kids to work with at Solon. It was a great experience, working with Dave then, being around Coach Sovers, Kevin Miller, Brent Sands, like all those guys were still there, and it was a great experience working with them. I just looked forward to going and working with college athletes.
Yeah.
And I obviously had a really strong connection to and I was excited about my first year as their intern head strength coach is basically what the position was. And you know, obviously that position grew from there. I didn't think I would enjoy. I looked at high school athletics as I don't think I can handle a not as mature athlete. I didn't think my temperament, my patience would be able to handle that. And I also had a very skewed, I turned out I was very wrong. If I presented the structure and discipline and the communication of what I expect, like not talking while I'm talking, not talking while you're doing your high knees to the person next to you, if I provide that opportunity that this is the standard of what I want, high school kids are just as capable of being disciplined on task as the collegiate athletes. Really the only difference is maybe what the skill was I was coaching. The skill expectation is lower, but the ability to execute it and execute it like with intent is all there. So that was the big thing that I was made aware of as I spent more and more time here at Solon my first year is I didn't have to worry about what their intent was as long as I was providing the right structure for it. And they were just as capable of doing it with a high level of maturity and time on task. I just had to provide that structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that when you have high expectations for kids, the natural response for most kids is that they want to meet those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
My next question, I guess, would be, what does it look like for you to hold that standard? So what are some of the techniques or the ways, some people like in the school world would call it just classroom management. Mm-hmm. What are some of the techniques and things that you use to make sure that you can hold the standard and hold kids to that standard of excellence that you want?
I think number one is just communication. And if you need to shut the radio off, if you need to stop the whole group, even though that can get kind of frustrating and you'll get an eye roll here or there, oh, coach is stopping us, like I'm not going to hesitate to do that. If I see something that needs to be addressed, I'm going to do it right off the bat. And I've had plenty of interns in my career at I've had some great interns so far in my career here at Solon, and the same thing is, when kids first get to know you and you first get to feel you out, if you give them some feedback about something and then you step away and you see the same problem happening again, you've got to go right back and address it. Mm-hmm. So when I first got here, we were maybe a little too goofy, a little too off task in our warm-up maybe, for example, and so I stopped the whole group and made it really clear that we are not going to talk while we're warming up, especially when we're doing stuff that requires a high degree of coordination and control and output, all right, especially in a fast tempo. If we're doing some walking knee up and grab and you're having a subtle conversation with somebody next to you, making a comment here or there, and you're doing it well and you're getting a good stretch, I can handle that, okay? We can handle that. But the second what you're doing tears you away from what we're trying to accomplish in that warm-up, for example, it's got to be stopped. And so I just don't shy away from repeating myself and re-engaging with any sort of behavior that needs to be corrected. And that was like the biggest thing I was focused on right off the bat, was just our time on task and what our intent was with what we had going on in the weight room or in the warm-up. It really wasn't movement technique, all right? The kids knew how to do the lifts. Were they engaging it? Were they doing all three movements? If it was an A1, 2, and 3, were we doing all three, or did we not really like one of them, or we weren't as comfortable with it, so we were just avoiding it? So just communicating with the athletes of, hey, I noticed you weren't doing A2. Why? All right, okay, that wasn't a good reason. Here's why you should be doing it. I expect to see you do it. If I didn't see it, 45 seconds later, the next round, I went right back to it. And that gets uncomfortable, especially being new to Solon. Like, it'd be very easy for me to just, oh, that's how it is. I had to attack that and get right back on that. And it's still something you're going to have to do even in year 10, is have those conversations. But I think that's one thing that's really helped me with the classroom management, if we want to put it that way, is constantly coming back and having those conversations and having that feedback, and not just looking at it as, well, that's how it is.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. I almost think, you tell me if I'm wrong, but when you know less people and you're new and you're setting the standard for the first time, the culture's being set the way that you need it, it's almost your duty at that point. It's almost easier to know, if I want this to go where I need it to go, I have to do this.
Yeah.
That has to be where it's at.
Yep.
And then maybe at some point you can tone things back or change things or whatever, but at the beginning especially, the standard has to be set.
Yeah,
right?
100%. And I will say, I also tried, now this is what I struggled with initially, is I already told myself don't try to change too much, but I was still trying to change too much or implement too many new things. And I had some good conversations with athletes about, hey, I see some frustration with this, or I notice I'm talking about, making sure we're doing our single leg RDLs, and then I notice a lot of us avoiding it. What's going on? Why do we think this is happening? Is it lack of motivation? Is it we're forgetting some of this stuff? And I had a couple kids mention, okay, there was a couple times where you gave us like 3 new things to do, and it's hard for us to keep track of all of that.
It's uncertainty, right?
It's uncertainty. So then I just pull away from it, and people just draw back from it. And I get that. And so then I stopped trying to correct as much stuff all at once and just kind of pick my battles. So like, for example, I said time on task was a huge thing. I wanted us making sure we were doing everything, all right? That didn't mean I avoided a really poor mechanic that could lead to injury. I was giving cues and trying to coach up technique. But I was mainly concerned of, is everybody attempting to do everything on their workout? And if they don't think they can, they should have talked to me as to why not.
Yeah.
Injury, don't understand it, etc. There's no reason we skip anything. The communication's there, the expectation's there. So if you don't think you can do all 3 things, for example, in like an A1 through 3 box, there should have been a conversation as to why. Yeah. And what modification do we need to make so that you can do your whole workout.
No, that point of time on task, I think it's such a big deal, because everything else will fall into place. Like, your programming can adjust to the way that you need it so that everybody feels comfortable with whatever it is, or the complexity of how you go through things it can level up over time. But really what it comes down to is, are kids going to get in there and do the work that needs to be done, right? I find sometimes, I think about this too. You talked about, like, if there's something that's, the form is just rough, it's like possibly going to lead to injury, we have to, I mean, it's our, do no harm is probably first and foremost in what our job is. Just holding the idea of safety at the forefront of our minds. But then after that, I think oftentimes what I see in the weight room is kids want, once again, to meet the expectation, to work hard. They know that they're in here for a reason. As soon as they get comfortable with things, they'll kill it, right? That's the tough part sometimes with the time on task, is like, what is the most efficient way to onboard kids? That's my next question. When you got there, what were some of the things that you focused on right from the very beginning? So I know you wanted to hold the standard, there's time on task that you're looking for, but what were the things that you were going to get established? So you mentioned the warm up a couple of times. What are the things that you're like, okay, if we're gonna put all of our eggs in certain baskets, which baskets are we looking at?
Your workout, your warm-up dictates everything after that. So if you come in and you're lighthearted and kind of lackadaisical in your warm-up and you're nonchalant about it, talking to people, being goofy, it carries over into the weight room. So the warm-up, number one, I kind of rearranged how we were set up or how they were used to being warmed up in the past, and just instead of going the length of the gym and we had 60 kids in there, I put them down the sideline and then down mid-court and maybe even down the volleyball court sideline, and had 3 rows, and then we're able to space out and be a little bit closer to almost arm's length away from one another. Mm-hmm. If you and I are shoulder to shoulder and we're trying to do Atlas lunge and you're my best friend, probably not going to be a great turnout. It's going to breed the ability. I try to set us up for success. I'm constantly saying that to our athletes about, hey, set yourself up for success, all right? Let's space ourselves out, give ourselves an opportunity to focus on what I'm doing and what I need to do well. And I carry that into the weight room where, okay, we've got push press. A lot of times early on, or hang cleans. We've got a lot of half racks like you have here, okay? The bar's in the rack, or the bench, is in the rack. We're going to do hang cleans, or even like rack cleans. And in the benches we have from Powerlift, you can slide them back in quite a ways. So technically you could do some rack cleans, for example, without taking the bench out, and you have just a little bit of space to have the bar on there, have your feet there, and do a rack clean. But nobody's gonna give a great intense effort when they have that equipment all so close to them. Get that bench out of there. Or we're doing military press or push press, and the J-cups were down at a bench height. So the athletes weren't maybe starting off really heavy on their push press, and they're just picking it up from the bar. And then by the time they get to their last set, they're pulling it up off the safety arms, and they're doing this ugly, ugly clean, so then they can do their push press. And I just kind of go over, set yourself up for success. Get those J-cups up, get the bar up at a collarbone height where you can save all your energy for just great sound technique as opposed to wasting energy. And number one, too, if I know I have to pick it up off the safety arms and I'm not picking it up at collarbone height, I'm probably not going to work as hard as I could have. There's no way I'll get the best effort out of my lift if I don't set myself up for a position to do the movement efficiently and not waste energy in certain aspects. So I'm always trying to look at ways for the athletes can set themselves up for success, but also in our programming and how we're setting up the room, where we're putting kids. So putting all the freshmen together, putting them all in a similar area of the room so I can address all their needs at the same time. When I first got in the room, it seemed like kids were very used to all going just wherever they felt like going. And to some degree, I still allow that. But if I've got a particular group that I know I'm going to have to address multiple times or have several conversations with, I'm going to put all those freshmen at these 6 racks. I'm going to put the softball team on those back 7 racks. You know, we're very fortunate at Solon. We've got 21 racks, 3 rows of 7 racks. So like this morning, you know, at 9 o'clock, we had some softball in there and we had some cross country in there. We did softball across 1 row. I did freshmen on 4 of the middle row, and then upperclassmen cross country, and the freshman was cross country. All right. I designated what ones I wanted them to go to, and then the upperclassmen cross country could just take whatever was left. They could be kind of wherever. So that way, myself and any other coaches I was working with knew where softball was at, knew where our freshman cross country were at, because they have much less exposure to the weight room. Some of them, that was their first, they'd never been in the weight room until cross country started. Obviously, if we can get them exposed to training earlier and doing it year round, that's great. But that's something that I'm definitely trying to do, is set us up for success by adjusting where we're at in the warm-up, addressing them, putting their equipment in a position that allows them to engage in the movements they're doing efficiently and not be affected by things that are around them.
I think that most strength coaches that have been doing the job for a while probably have landed on this and they realize it. But one of the underrated skills that a strength coach has is the ability to write programs and think through environments so that things flow.
Yep.
The sequences are good, the areas are set up, things have like a rhythm to them. It's just crazy to me how many times, like, the X's and O's of strength and conditioning, you might see it in a textbook, you might see it in a certification, you might have been taught in college classes, but when the rubber meets the road, everybody has a certain room, and they're going to find things within that room that work really well. You know, so like explaining through that, I think is just really good.
Yeah.
It's good for a lot of people to hear.
Because there's a lot of pairings that make a ton of sense. All right, and we actually came across this with our workout today, specifically our Wednesday workout. And that we noticed with our football group that was coming in, and I just talking with Dave, like, as you look through the workout, the pairings look great, it's awesome. But then as you start to think about, okay, we're doing barbell movements, 3 barbell movements that particular day. We've got the connecting cross braces to do pull-ups on, but some athletes really struggle to pull up, and so one way I've found that works really well for pull-ups is when you put the J-cups up at a pretty good height and you run the band left to right.
Yep.
And if the athlete already struggles with pull-up, our connecting cross brace is a little bit more of a fat bar. And so if we can move them onto the rack to do their pull-up, a little bit narrower diameter, they don't have to focus on grip as much, they can use the band a little more efficiently. When you tie the band to the connecting cross brace or the pull-up bar and run it straight down, you can get your foot in there, but you basically got to straighten the leg out and leave it straight the whole time. And what I don't like about that is, number one, that's a big stretch. It's awkward getting that stretched out that far. And also, you can't vary the band intensity. Right. It's helping you like that forever.
Right.
When you run the band,
change the size of the band, but it's still not enough variance.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And you can't change how the green band, for example, helps you throughout the range of motion. When you run the band left to right, you can straighten your leg out or not. So once you realize, oh, hey, I'm using green band and I'm really not having to straighten my leg out very much to get all the way to the bar and get full extension, all right, I'll go down to the black band or whatever your band progression is. Right. And start the whole process over again. So we just made a small observation that, all right, yeah, we love to be able to do our push press with our pull-ups and pair it that way, but some of our athletes that struggle with pull-ups were very hesitant to want to go and do pull-ups. Now, number one, they shouldn't skip it. That was not an excuse for our athletes to skip pull-up, but did we set them up for success in the best way possible where they had as few excuses as possible not to get into that?
Yep.
So today we just moved around what a couple of our pairings were and moved pull-up towards the end of the workout and paired it with something else. And they had no reason not that they couldn't get access to the rack, and you saw a lot more guys getting into pull-up and getting good quality pull-ups in too.
Yeah.
All right. Some kids don't need a band, some do, and especially when we're going wide overhand grip and we're getting full touch the chest, full extension. Yeah. What we'd like to see, you're going to, more often than not, you're going to see kids using a band, especially if the reps are on the higher side.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think about a lot of rooms where they're set up. Some rooms have the dumbbells right at their rack, but a lot of rooms have a different dumbbell area. So just like general programming wise, just stuff that people happen upon, and I'm sure it's like common knowledge now, but like if you get a barbell movement, probably don't do another thing at the rack, right? If you got a dumbbell area, you got an open space, utilize those spaces and be able to flow through those fairly well. And some people want to keep all their kids right at their rack, which we were talking about pre-show, about sometimes when you have a grid floor, like if you've got squares on your floor, you can kind of designate where people are at, and you can still do kind of the same setup.
Yep. I think one more thing that I picked up on when I was at Co that helped out a lot is when you have some limited equipment. For example, we've got 21 racks and 5 glute ham benches, maybe 6. If you do a pairing of something on the rack and glute ham bench, you're going to get bogged down there. Now, order of operations of training, I think most would agree, high stress CNS, you want that first. So you're sprinting, you're jumping, I'd really look at it as jumping, running, high intensity running like sprinting agility, your explosive lifts, cleans, trap bar squat jumps, then even speed squats right after that or something of that nature, then your heavy compound lifts and so on and so on. I would say if you're in a situation like that, definitely make sure you do your CNS stuff first. If you're low on equipment for that movement, maybe put it in like your middle box, like your B1 through 3, if you're doing a 3-paired movement or training regimen. And then tell athletes, all right, everyone's going to do the A box because we want to make sure we get our cleans done first. But now as we're moving into the rest of our workout and we've got a B box and a C box, all right, I'm okay if this half of the room goes straight through the workout. This other half of the room is going to go A, C, B. Correct. And then we can spread them out. We're not bogged down. Helps with the time on task. because then you get people in line, kids are talking to the kids that are doing the lift, distracting them,
Totally.
and it just muddies everything up.
Yeah, when we first started, basically, we had a certain setup to our room where we couldn't do how we program now. And so we almost had to go either ABC, BCA, or CAB with our kids, like almost like a rotation through. So you know how you have 7 rows of 3? It'd be like one row you do this, next row you do this, next row you do this, and you cycle through. And obviously that wouldn't be optimal, like in the same way that you just said. But sometimes logistics are the logistics. Right? And
we actually did that in June with some of our training. Is we rotated through and had stations, and you rotated through. And I will say, as we move down the road, if we can somehow look at different ways to structure things and make sure those high CNS intensive movements get done first, I'd really love to see that. But I also wanted to see how we typically did things in the past, and some things we might just not change out of necessity. Okay, take the good with the bad. But I see the limitations to the carryover especially if we got to run in beforehand, or we're going to go run afterwards. Ideally, I like to see shorter, high-intensity running done first and then lift. If you're doing more of a conditioning, I can see that making sense to do after your lift. It just comes down to the conversation of, does conditioning make sense at this time of the year? Or should we save that for more preseason? So there's just a lot of things to think about there. But yeah, as long as you're getting good work in and kids are being safe, you can do it different ways. But if you can hit those high CNS things done first, that'd be ideal.
Right. So we talked about structure. We talked about a little bit of your weight room and how many racks you have. And there's one of you, right? So if you got 21 racks and there's one of you, ideally, everybody listens to exactly what you say and then they just go do it. But obviously that never works out that way. What are some of the ways that you just build leaders up within the room and empower your student athletes to lead their teammates or rack mates in a good way?
I think, when I first got to Solon, I actually kind of tended to lean more towards the less experienced athletes, because in my mind and from what I visibly saw, the more experienced athletes, and I would say maybe the less engaged athletes. And I try not to hyper focus on, let's say, the bottom 10% if it's a bad attitude or don't want to do it. But if I saw people struggling to really engage, and maybe some of it was they just didn't know what they were doing, I tried to build that up, because then in my mind, at least the more experienced, more motivated athletes were getting some good work in. And then I would occasionally work over there and say, hey, I noticed us doing things slightly out of order. You're getting good work in. You're in here, I can tell you want to work out, but I noticed you're kind of doing your own thing. Why is that? And so occasionally I'd throw a small conversation with that towards the end of the workout. I'd pick out 1 or 2 kids that were older that I could tell wanted to train, but maybe were deviating off the workout a little bit, or putting their own twist on it, and seeing why that was. And not attacking them and saying, you're doing this wrong, you're not doing what I told you to do, fix it. It's why. Can I understand what the motivation was to do it a little bit differently? And then maybe that gives me an opportunity to explain, well, I see your point. Oh, I didn't understand you had that injury. All right, that's good to know. Let me know these types of things. And have those conversations kind of off to the side and gradually add those in there. And then in the meanwhile, the majority of the workout is focusing more on the younger kids, the kids that definitely needed some direction, and got them on task. So as I got them up to speed, then I could start spending a little bit more time with the older kids and following back up with them. Hey, how's that going now that I've asked you to start doing the exercises in order? All right, I had some kids just squatting and then doing A2 and A3, as opposed to cycling through the 3 movements like they were instructed to do. And so I actually kind of let them correct themselves with some small subtle comments and remarks, and I saw who would and who wouldn't. And then I'd say that one kid that was starting to actually make the corrections I was asking for, that was working out with the other kid that kind of wanted to do it the other way, and get them to help lead them that direction. So they were hearing it from maybe a peer as opposed to myself. But once again, I came back. And so hopefully, I think one thing they understood is whether they're annoyed or not, hopefully eventually what they come to understand is he actually means it, he actually cares. It's not just something to say, and if you did it, you did it. If not, he's going to leave me alone for the rest of the quarter or semester, because that just wasn't going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't know the best way for me to package that up, but to condense that down when you care enough to keep on going back to kids and having those small conversations, and then saying, why are you deviating from what I've asked? You know, like, I think that's just a really good way forward. And you just think about it too, like, say if it's not your principal, because you're a contract, but you don't have to answer directly to the principal. Let's say it's your athletic director. Okay, athletic director comes down and says, well, what the heck? Why are you doing this, and this? And it's like the first thing is defensive, right? That's the natural response.
Right.
But when your athletic director comes in and says, hey, what's your thought process with this? It's a totally different conversation.
Absolutely.
We're all humans, even if we're high schoolers, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Even if we're still like on that maturity path, right? Yeah, that's good. Tell me, what about when you do your before school stuff and you do your in school stuff, is there a lot of change between the two, or is it fairly similar thread throughout your day? So your day feels fairly similar from start to finish, or is every session just a little bit different?
Well, right now, and for the foreseeable future, we do offer team-specific training for the most part. There might be certain times where kids that are out of season are doing the same things that are kids that are in season, just the volume is different, right? For example, maybe baseball is doing what was maybe originally looked at as an out-of-season card, but especially on a game day, I'm telling them, hey, you guys can limit the volume, or I want to see you specifically skip this. You know, whereas there's always typically an in-season and out-of-season going on. So like during track, during fourth block, there was track kids doing their track workout, and I had out-of-season kids, and then I also offered like what I called a PE workout, where it was maybe somebody who is in weight training but doesn't play a sport and maybe not really motivated to learn some of the more technical lifts like a clean.
Yeah.
So basically I would modify Dave's out-of-season program and remove some of the more complex Olympic lifts and add in like a sumo deadlift. Or we weren't maybe hitting a heavy unilateral leg lift, so I'd maybe put like a front-loaded split squat instead of snatch pull or something like that. So there's always a little bit of a wrinkle. In the mornings, I guess it was always a little bit different because it was always in-season athletes. I really didn't let out-of-season kids come in the morning very often unless there was enough room to allow them to be there. Before school was highly prioritized for in-season athletes. And then if in-season athletes didn't want to get up early, the trade-off was you take a class, but now you've got to come in 5 days a week. And obviously we're not going to train, or we didn't train heavy weightlifting 5 days a week. Dave would give me a 3-day in-season program. I'd maybe look at a way to break it up a little bit and create a 4-day variation of it, or I would even offer just like, all right, here's the 3 days we're going to prioritize our training, and we'll use this day as a recovery day.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes that 5th day was a little bit of a recovery day, or maybe I'd let the kids do a little bit of their own thing, get their own workout in, walk our track that we're fortunate to have. We have that indoor track.
Super nice.
Little details like that. Play some knockout. Just let them kind of relax. And honestly, on those days, sometimes I would have a kid come up to me and say, hey, got a big test. Can I go study for that? I'm like, as long as I go find you in the next 10 minutes and you're sitting in the cafeteria actually studying for it, like you said you would, and you're not on your phone, I'd allow that occasionally.
Trust goes a long way, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit of flexibility too. Some understanding that I can be flexible if you guys can be honest with the expectations and the communication aspect about it.
Totally. When you are talking about your schedule on Monday through Friday, just so listeners are on the same page, you talked about your block schedule. You basically eat them for 1 quarter, 45 days straight, Monday through Friday. And then after that 45 days, they don't take it for another time, or do they get to take it multiple times throughout the year?
Kids have the ability to take it all 4 quarters.
Okay.
They can take weight training all 4 quarters. I believe we're slightly shifting things this year where as juniors and seniors you can have an open, and now if you want to take weight training all 4 quarters, I believe after you've taken it 1 or 2, maybe after your second time, if you want to take it 3rd quarter and 4th quarter, for example, and you did it 1st and 2nd, I believe you've got to do it during your open if you've already taken it. So you can only take it twice and get credit for it and still have an open. You could technically take it 3rd and 4th and have an open, but you wouldn't get any credit for it. So there's not very many situations where you could feasibly do that and have enough credits to graduate.
Got it.
I've also had a few athletes, once again, if you build some relationships and some positive expectations, and I get a kid that comes to me and says, and who's done a nice job and says, hey, can I come in I have an open, can I come in during third block and just come in on specific days and do my required in-season lift? Yep, no problem. You're going to show up and do the warm-up with us, but when you're done, you can take off. And I've had a couple kids do that, and it worked out really, really well. Yeah. And so as long as it's somebody that I trust and can do a good job, I'm happy to see that. And I think another thing I'm interested to see is, another thing we're going to do is once a kid's taken it and they go to retake the class because they like taking that class, is they've got to be approved by myself or Coach Stanton. So if you have somebody who's a little bit more of a wallflower, a little bit more of someone who's distracting and more disruptive, they'll come take the class. We're keeping track of their time on task, their attendance, etc. If they want to take it again, it's got to be approved by us.
Yeah.
And obviously we're going to have to make sure those expectations are clear before they take the class to them and mom and dad, or the parents, guardians, and make sure everyone's on the same page as to why we're not allowing you to take it the second time.
Yeah.
So, so that I hope that really improves kind of our atmosphere and time on task. And it got way better throughout the course of the year, in my opinion. So, not something I'm really worried about.
The ability to have kids come in during an open period and train is due to the fact of like 7,000 square foot or something like that.
Yeah.
So for the listeners,
Yes.
we're sitting in a 1,800 square foot. Kids come and ask me, I'm like, yeah, we'll have to think through this because most of the time it won't work.
Right.
Yeah, just space-wise.
And that's with certain blocks. Like coincidentally, throughout the course of the year, normally second block was my smallest class. All right, so that's when I was allowing it. Fourth block was always full.
Yeah,
at some points we had 68 kids in there. I wasn't letting anybody else in at that time.
Yeah.
So it all just depends on space availability, if I can offer that or not. So.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah. If you could nail down, and this is hard because it's so broad, but if you could nail down like a training philosophy, and you can take this a number of different ways, like freshman to senior, or in season to out of season, or just Solon strength. Like, what would your training philosophy be?
I think some of the big things, that I jotted down was, really always looking at your reward over your risk, and what's the type of quality movement we're doing. I'm always super focused on movement-based training, running, plyometrics, flexibility and mobility, and what's the risk to reward of the types of things you're asking these kids to do. And I want them to be able to squat a lot. I want them to be able to deadlift a lot, clean a lot. If they can bench press a lot, these are all awesome things. But if they can't externally rotate at the shoulder, if they can't keep their knees out, if they can't keep their feet flat when they squat because of the movement pattern they're following, because of their ankle mobility, I'm looking at the path of how we move and how we control our body and our body awareness much more than how much weight is on the bar. And we tend to hyper focus on loading up weight, and we just end up compensating and changing the movement pattern, and it just looks worse and worse as we go. We're not getting much reward out of that, and we're just teaching ourselves to change our expectations or change what we do to meet the expectations we have for our own egos, or what we think we need to do to meet the standard of everybody else, can be on the same level of competition with everybody else. So I'm always concerned about that, and I never want to see us doing something just for the sake of doing it. Yeah, it feels good to do that, have that cool, trendy, fancy movement on our workout, but did we actually do it well? Or we've had this conversation before, and I've had conversations like this with Dave and Coach Stanton of, it is nice to be able to offer a sports-specific training program if it's necessary and if we're doing it really, really well. Whereas I think in a lot of coaches' instances, based on space, manpower, you might be way better off having everybody do the same thing and just limiting the volume or making small modifications to that movement pattern. Okay, you've got a kid with a pin in his wrist. Okay, they're probably not going to be rack and cleans. You need to convince that kid you're never going to rack and clean really well because of that pin in your wrist. So quit trying to muscle up this clean and hold it really awkwardly, and it's throwing the whole movement off. let's understand we're just trying to work triple extension, and we can do that with pulls and high pulls. So not being so hyper-focused on I need to be able to do X, Y, Z at this intensity, and start focusing on why we're doing it and changing the movement patterns or maintaining movement patterns instead of certain expectations that aren't really helping us accomplish the reason we're in here training in the first place. So those are some things I'm really looking at and focusing on when I'm at Solon. I think communication is huge, and attention to detail, accountability, those three things where I kept coming back to kids at the beginning of the year. I kept coming back, and I could tell some kids weren't used to being coached up on a specific movement maybe, or they were newer to the weight room and they weren't really sure how the flow would go and should they be on task, could they skip stuff. When I came back 45 seconds later and said the same thing, they started to understand like this is going to be a constant thing. The feedback is always going to be there. So that's something I'm always trying to push, is that I'm always going to come back and coach you up on these things and not give up and be like, well, you're just not going to get it. And I know the skill level and the dedication is going to be different for everybody. You're going to have some kids that are just never going to want to engage, or going to really struggle to. And I'm going to try really hard not to spend too much time there. I'm not going to give up, but there's kids that are very dedicated that I don't want to ignore. And there's that middle part of the group that if I really stick with them and keep encouraging them and giving them positive feedback, pointing out in a helpful manner the things they need to work on, they'll drift towards that top tier athlete that is in there wanting to work hard and still needs some guidance. So I did that too much early in my career. Absorb myself with that bottom 10 that just wants to be a stick in the mud and not do it. Yeah. Pick your battles, make sure they're not a distraction, not going to hurt themselves. Give them attention as well, but don't spend all your time down there. Yeah. With people that are unwilling to meet some of those challenges. Those are the things I'm really trying to focus on within our group, and like the rest just takes care of itself, I think. But I just want to make sure there's always that attention to detail, and that I'm really communicating with the athletes and admitting when I'm wrong, and doing the best I can to be flexible and make adjustments for kids so they know I care and they know I'm trying to get the most out of them as I possibly can. Yeah. I'm willing to completely change the workout up if they have chronic low back injuries, for example, and I don't want them to just turn into a social hour and oh, I saw something I can't do, I'm just going to skip it, because it gets really easy to do that, and before you know it, you're just hanging out, kind of doing one thing on the workout, and then that pulls the rest of that group you're hanging out with that direction.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before the show. I've heard that principle as 10-80-10. So basically, top 10, bottom 10, and then everybody in between, where can you pull them, right? And I think that's always a really smart move. And you find that some kids are super coachable. So it's so fun to go back and keep on coaching them up and keep on giving them feedback. And then you find other kids that it's almost like they don't want to be coached. What do you do in those situations?
I keep it small. I try to make sure I'm very, very distinct about, hey, I recognize that when I'm talking to you sometimes, this is the response I get. And I don't do this daily because it wouldn't work. But occasionally I'll pick a kid and I'll just say, hey, once again, this happens multiple times, I just gave you a simple cue about how I'd like you to set something up, or making sure you keep your posture in line as you're hitting that row instead of curling the body on one of those blast trap rows or a TRX row. And immediately as I address you, your body language sinks. It changes. Why is that? Why are you so uncomfortable or frustrated when I address you? Is it embarrassment? Is it frustration with yourself? Because it reads as you're upset that I'm even talking to you. And I just want you to be aware of it. And maybe it comes into a conversation, they're a little more open, but they understand that you're observing these things, it's not appropriate, or maybe they're unintentionally doing it and it's something that they can work on. But I found that if I do that in small doses and I keep coming back but spread out a little bit, you can start gaining some traction there.
If we're talking about like heart change for kids, when you have a hard conversation like that, but one that's meaningful, maybe it's a freshman or sophomore, by the time they're a junior or senior, like how much more are they bought in at that point? You know what I mean? Like that's such a cool deal.
In my experience, now granted, I can't relate this as closely to my high school experience because I've only been there a little over a year. But at Co, I felt like the students that really struggled early on, if they were still there by year 4, they've come a long ways. Mm-hmm. They maybe even end up being some of your favorite athletes. Occasionally you'd get a kid that kind of stayed in that realm all 4 years, occasionally, but not all the time, not very often. Unfortunately, it just turned out to not to be their thing, and that could have been part of why they were struggling or you were struggling to relate to them in the first place. That's the other thing too, is over that period of time, you both have to kind of adjust. It's not just obviously the student athlete. You're adjusting as a coach too, how you're approaching them. Do they do well when I'm going to use the term calling out. I don't really like to say I'm calling people out when I'm giving them feedback in the middle. I worked with 8th graders this morning, their second workout with me. At the high school level, I'm much more hesitant to call somebody out in the middle of a warm-up and say, hey, you were doing this when you should be, I want you to keep that hip square on that RDL walk. Can we handle that? That's something I'm still feeling out. Can we handle that acknowledgement of corrective behavior we're working towards in front of our peers like that? So I've got to figure out which kids can and can't handle that, and then also address the group that, hey, don't be embarrassed as I'm giving you some feedback in front of everybody, because everyone needs to be working on this. I just happen to use you as an example. Yeah. Everyone can learn from this. So you're all trying to get better at this at the same time.
Right.
So trying to create that expectation to be coached in front of your peers.
So many times I sway towards like, if a kid is killing it in front of all their peers, I'll call that out, let everybody know. But if somebody is really struggling, they can't hit the form or whatever it is, I'll stop everyone and say, hey, I'm seeing multiple people that are doing it like this. And I think it gives them a little bit of, hey, it's not just me that's struggling with this. There's other people that are struggling with it. But it matters how, it's like the personal relations part of it, the day-to-day, the one-on-one with kids, that matters so much to get everything moving in the right direction. Sometimes I think I forget that, and I'll get frustrated maybe with a group, when in reality it's like 3 kids. Or whatever it is, but it just feels like a lot more. And I don't want to sit in that world. I want to make sure that I'm focusing where I need to be focused. So that's good. What about, you've been here a little over a year, you're a seasoned strength coach, you know what the next step is for what you want to implement. What's your vision at Solon over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years? What do you want to build toward?
Well, the number one thing is just thinking about what we're doing at Solon right now and how last year went. I've already got some immediate things. Like I said early on, I tried to change too much, and we were I was adding a little too much on that 4th day that I didn't really have some structure for. Didn't know what I wanted us to do that day, and I was trying to add in some complex stuff that was movement based, but it was like just too many new things. We shifted it to more of a recovery day, where we're coming in, doing a warm up, doing like maybe a complex, a barbell or dumbbell complex for a couple rounds, then 2 rounds of 6 bodyweight exercises. We maybe have a pull-up variation on there, a push-up variation, maybe a plank, core stabilization hold, maybe like a glute ham raise, stuff that was pretty light intensity, and really it wasn't meant to be hard. I was asking them to do 8 to 10 efficient, controlled reps, 2 rounds of it, move on into a big band stretch, some sort of static stretch routine. Then they could do some soft tissue foam rolling and some ankle stretches, some ankle mobility stretches, like a plate ankle mobility or box ankle mobility stretch. And that worked out really, really well. And it was something we could time up, and I'd vary it during the week what day we put that on. It wasn't always Tuesday, for example. If it made sense for our track athletes to have it this day, but our basketball athletes that were still finishing up a different day, the recovery workout was on different days. So it's nice to add those layers based on what your sport is, but we could have done that if we were all in the same program, and I just could have said, hey, this group, you're doing your recovery day today, this group, you're doing your recovery day that day. So that got shifted. I was able to create that more second semester, so I'm excited to see that implemented and things were running really smoothly. I really liked how things were flowing in the second semester, especially fourth quarter. I'm excited to see how that starts the tone with our first quarter. The other thing I'd like to see implemented a little bit more is more year-round movement-based training. Right now the class is pretty much, we're lifting. And if you're in season, like nobody's really running a lot year-round, and I'd like to get a little bit more running and plyometric work in the workouts during the school year. And so once again, that's going to have to vary. If it's a volleyball game day, I can't say, yep, we're all going to go do a bunch of top speed work that day. That doesn't make sense for those athletes to be doing it. Okay, could I move that for that group at a different point in the week? I think it's possible, but basically being able to come up with a structure. If it's just me in there and there's 60 kids and I've got 20 that have a game that day and the other 40 don't, where am I going to be? How am I going to set that up? So that's something I'm still working on, of how I want to incorporate more movement-based training, but train in a way that makes sense and is smart for everybody based on what their demand is that particular week, in season or out of season.
Totally.
The other thing I'd really like to see us have is trap bars. And specifically, I'm going to call them a multifunction bar because that's what Intech, I believe, calls their open back trap bar. I want an open back rackable trap bar. You can set them up as a yoke safety squat instead of having the space to also have safety squat bars in your weight room. You can put that open bar on the back and grab the closed parts on your back, grab the open part in each hand to stabilize it. Kind of a narrower stance squat because it restricts you a little bit, but you're able to get some squats in without having to front rack, all right, or put your arms back here. And so somebody with a shoulder injury could do it basically a typical back squat, all right. You can do lunges like that. You can do good mornings like that. You can do bent rows with them and have the open part in front of you. And if you do your bent row and you drive your elbows back kind of towards the hip like you should, the closed part just barely misses your hips. And so it's just a new apparatus, and then you can get into squat jumps and different explosive lifts with those as well. You can get split stance positions with them, single leg deadlifts, split stance deadlifts. I just love the versatility of those. Flip them over for the high handles, accommodate different athletes, flexibilities, or if they're an injured athlete, progress them back towards some of that stuff by doing the high handle stuff. It's endless possibilities with those. It's just finances and storage. So
we're gonna have to clip that and send it to Intech. I'm sure they'll like that.
yeah.
No, that's good. That's
Jason will love hearing that. He was great for what we did at Co, and I know he's helped supply some stuff at Solon as well. So I like what they offer there as far as their products. Yeah, for sure.
You guys have their plates too, correct?
I believe they are. Yeah, I think those are Intech bumpers.
Yeah.
And I
True
believe
power lift, but is Intech bumpers. Yeah.
Yep.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
We'll send it straight to Jason.
Yeah.
That'd be great. What about just like professional development resources? So you're in the college level. It's literally you're in a university where learning is valued. Now you're in high school, it's still valued. Mm-hmm. What are the go-to resources for you to continue to learn, to grow? Do you like going to clinics? Do you like going to do site visits? What's your go-tos to make sure you're top notch?
I like in-person visits. I like going and watching other people in person, and when you have moments, you can have brief little conversations with the coaching staff before, after, in the middle of the workout. Hey, what's your thought process on this? Is there a reason you guys set it up this specific way? And just even visibly seeing how it's conducted is really, really helpful to me. I'm a very visual in-person, just like I was talking about with this. I just think I get a lot more out of it. And then also, I do enjoy going to clinics. I haven't gone to that many. I actually spoke at a clinic a little while back, loved it. I loved the opportunity. It was a lot of fun. I would say those are two things that I really do enjoy and want to do more of. I've definitely done a lot more in-person visits than I have clinics. Honestly, the thing I use the most though, that like I'm always pulling ideas from, is like social media, like YouTube clips or shorts that you get on social media of just different movements. And I can't look at that and just immediately plug it in. I screenshot stuff all the time and save them in a folder on my Google Drive as new movement potentials, and I categorize it by, is this a movement-based pattern, is it an explosive lift, why would I be using it? And then I go back and look at it, and I might start looking at it and be like, no, this is I'm just looking at things to add. I don't want to add things for the sake of adding things.
Right.
I want to add things that are would be meaningful to us, be able to implement easily with some proper coaching and some time and effort on it. That's something that I use a ton out of, is just utilizing what other people are doing and, thinking to myself, hey, does that make sense to apply to our situation? I've been trying to implement something that gets our thoracic mobility improved, and I've been using this technique, and I feel good about it, but is there a better way?
Right.
And so I'm always looking at those and seeing a new movement on Facebook or wherever I'm seeing it and asking myself, is that better than what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Should I add that to what I'm doing? Should I replace that?
Yeah.
Or stick with what I've got? It's always good to really be honest with yourself about why I'm doing the things I'm having kids do.
Right.
And having conversations with Dave, for example, like, okay, here's what we have on the workout. Are we flexible enough to recognize, hey, here's that little shift. This would make sense and set us up for success, be in a little bit better position to do these pull-ups if we on the fly. And that's what we did at the beginning of the workout. Hey, swap D1 with A2 and swap B2 with C3, and now we're able to do our pull-ups and be on our rack. And have kids more accessible to that skinnier bar, easier band setup, and it's more places to do pull-ups, so we weren't as bogged down on the pull-up as well.
Totally.
So.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to go see people. It's really fun to see people, how they interact. It's really nice to see other people's situations and how they do things. So that in person is always great. And then like the social media, it's like little pieces of that all the time.
Yeah.
Like just a curated flow of that. The amount of growth that I've had from conversations, going places, and then constantly doing the same thing. I think probably strength coaches almost do this to a fault, is like you watch something and you're like, okay, would I use this? Wouldn't I? And you keep on doing that process over and over. And even in your own sessions, what went well, what could be improved, how are we going to change it for next time, like that type of stuff. And the chase for improvement never stops. Right? As long as you got your flow of how you're going to go and fight for that improvement, it's good stuff.
And and as I mentioned earlier, it's great to come up with new movements and new things to incorporate training to keep things lively and keep kids engaged in what you're doing. But at the end of the day, you're still going to keep some of your core stuff. It's just always going to stay the same. And maybe you learn a new way to teach it, or a new modification for somebody who's got an injury or a mobility limitation on that specific movement to make it more valuable to them. But you don't want to just change things for the sake of changing it, obviously. Too. You want to have a perfectly good reason to do it.
Right. Yeah. So we've talked about your demographics. We've talked about some of the ins and outs of your job. We've talked about a lot about what it looks like to empower kids to be leaders, and the communication aspects and the attention to detail. And there's just so many things that just indicate that you're making the big time where you're at. But if you could nail down for you in your circumstance, at Solon High School, how are you making the big time?
I think the thing that's going to help propel us even beyond where we've been at right now and make me feel good about going to work every day is, and I've had this conversation multiple times with athletes, other coaches at Solon, my interns, is when I first got to Solon and I'm implementing some new stuff and I'm getting the eye rolls and the challenges of us not picking it up right away or being resistant to these new techniques, that's uncomfortable. That's not fun. It's frustrating. It's a little bit nerve-wracking. Am I going to get these kids to buy in? Day 3 of my 4th block, 58 kids in there, and just me coming from Co. I was looking around. I'm like, was this my best decision? That was uncomfortable. It was nerve-wracking. It was challenging to have those new conversations and build those relationships and those new expectations. And then we got about a month and a half in, and things were really starting to smooth out, and it was going really well. What I'm going to always keep doing is going back to that feeling, because I'm going to find something new we need to do a little bit better. Okay, now our clean technique, I'm going to start tightening down on that. I think that could be improved a lot. That's an example of something I want to see us do better, is really improve and spend some time where we just work technique, not just do the whole movement, but work some tall muscle cleans. Do we have the patience to stay here and have the flexibility to get the bar up racked safely so that we can make the movement pattern more natural and more efficient instead of reverse curling it and being stuck here? Our wrists hurt because it's pushing down through us instead of resting on the body. I'm always going to go back to, all right, The second I feel comfortable and things are flowing, I think the reason I'm going to feel good every day going to work and it's going to get better and better, and I'm looking at this job for the long haul, and I'm really excited to see where I'm at, 5, 10, et cetera, is I'm always going to go back to, all right, time to get uncomfortable again. Mm-hmm. And that repetition of picking the next thing to start digging into, and it might be the same thing, and I've got to go back to it. We did it well for a while, and it's one of those things where, all right, if I don't say anything for a while, do we kind of test us a little bit? Or it's the new kids that come in that influence that. Or I went from a junior to a senior, so now I feel like I can get away with a little bit more. Or I'm going to test coach a little bit on this. All right, I'm going to go back to those things and keep getting in that uncomfortable feeling of, all right, is this going to work? And you don't know if it's going to work until you roll up your sleeves and you go address it. And you find that, or you find something new to implement that will help correct those behaviors or those weaknesses that we have, whether it's being strong in a lift, keeping our feet flat, time on task, whatever it may be. I'm always going to go back to that. And if I recognize that, hey, things are going really, really well, I need to tell myself, Matt, there's something going on in here that we need to readdress or we could make better. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's going to keep elevating what I do.
I've had a lot of these conversations, a lot of podcast interviews, a lot of just asking coaches what it looks like for this. And I've never heard a coach answer it like that. It was really cool, because knowing that you want to be uncomfortable because you know where that growth is at is I think the quality that strength coaches want to strive for, right? Because they want that in the other athletes. Yeah. So like as soon as your athletes feel like they've made it, it's like, I don't know if we're on the right track anymore, right?
And I'll be real honest. There was times at Co where I caught myself and I was like, Matt, you've been way too comfortable for too long. Like, I know you're working with and honestly, I felt like the kids were bought in, doing a good job. I just felt like I was a little stuck, and I know there's something we could be doing a little bit better. Yeah. Or we could be implementing something new. There was something that I could have been doing, and then at those times, I didn't feel good about what I was doing. Mm-hmm. I thought my programming was good. I thought the techniques that I was seeing in the room was pretty good. It didn't feel right, because I just know that you're there for a reason. Mm-hmm. You're not there to be a babysitter. You're really not. You're there to help keep developing the kids, keep them on the tip of the sword, however you want to look at it, that we're always striving to be just ahead there and making something a little bit better than it was the day before. And I think we all know that doesn't happen when you're comfortable. So that might be part of what has me at Solon now. I was blessed with a great opportunity and some great support from people that knew me at Co and knew me from my time at Solon that allowed me to get to where I am right now. And knowing Dave beforehand, I think, really helped too. A lot of the staff at Solon was familiar with me. A former teammate of mine, Aaron Haydenfeld, the head wrestling coach, is the one that made me aware of the position. And I think having that mentality that I'm trying to always make sure I'm going back to being uncomfortable and recognizing when I'm not, and I need to change it up and fix that, mm-hmm. so that we're getting the most out of what we're doing and I'm getting the most out of what we're doing. Because if I'm not fulfilled by it, it's not going to carry over.
It's really cool to see a coach that has put a lot of time and effort into one institution for so long, your alma mater.
Yeah, they were great. I loved it there.
Right?
Yeah.
And then to be able to make a leap of faith, come to a new school district, a new level, a new demographic, a new everything, and then restart. Yeah. That takes a lot.
It was really hard. Yeah. Really hard for a lot of reasons. And I was very fortunate to have the time that I did there. And I've got a lot of people to thank for that. A lot of athletes that I just absolutely loved working with there. Mm-hmm. Such a great experience. And I miss Co, but this position here at Solon has been so great for me. That's great. Just personally, like, it has been so good for me, and I'm really excited to see where it takes the rest of my strength training career and what the next 10 to 15 years looks like. You know, I signed up for this job thinking I could see myself doing this for, don't get me wrong, I was apprehensive for sure about a lot of things, but I took it thinking I want to do this for the next 10 to 15 years. I want to be here for the long haul, not just something I'm going to do and see if it works for 5 years. Right. That's not my mentality about it. And never say never. Never would have thought I'd been at Co for 14. And I told Aaron when he called me about it, I wasn't interested because I didn't think I was going to go to high school ever. And as I talked with him about it, recognized that it was something that could be a great opportunity for me, and it's been just amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely,
good,
man. Always good to catch up with you.
Yeah, thanks for
making the big time where you're at.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.